China just took over a $1 trillion industry that America invented, and most people don't even know it happened. While Tesla gets headlines, China now controls 70% of global electric vehicle production. While American solar companies struggle, China produces 80% of the world's solar panels. While Biden celebrates battery factories, China owns 69% of the global EV battery market. The clean energy industry is worth $1.9 trillion annually, and China dominates every single piece: EVs, batteries, solar panels, rare earth mining, processing, manufacturing. This isn't coming, it already happened. In 2024, China sold 11 million electric vehicles. America sold 1.3 million. BYD, a Chinese company most Americans never heard of, now sells more EVs than Tesla globally. Here's how insane this is. America invented lithium batteries, solar panels, and electric vehicles. Bell Labs created solar cells in 1954. U.S. companies pioneered lithium batteries in the 1970s. Tesla showed EVs could be cool in 2008. We invented the technology. China won the industry. And it's not just scale, it's domination of the entire supply chain. China mines 70% of rare earths needed for batteries, processes 90% of them, manufactures 80% of solar panel components, builds 75% of EV batteries, controls pricing, supply, and innovation. In this video, I'm exposing exactly how China went from 0 to 70% market share in 15 years, why U.S. companies can't compete even with $375 billion in subsidies, what this means for Tesla, Ford, and GM stock, how China's building factories in 100 countries to bypass tariffs, and why this industry takeover is permanent unless America does something radical in the next 24 months. But before we expose China's silent takeover of the trillion-dollar clean energy industry, if you want to understand how global competition affects your investments and which companies win versus lose, subscribe to the Investor's Lens. Hit subscribe now. There's one number in the electric vehicle industry that reveals China's complete dominance, and it's getting worse every single month. It's 70%. China now produces 70% of all electric vehicles sold globally, and that number is climbing. Let me put this in perspective. In 2024, China manufactured and sold 11 million electric vehicles. The United States sold 1.3 million total, and most of those were Teslas. Europe sold about 3 million. China alone outsold America and Europe combined by more than double, and it's accelerating. In 2020, China's EV market share was 50%. In 2022, it was 60%. In 2024, it hit 70%. At this rate, by 2026, China will control 75 to 80% of global EV production. Here's what makes this takeover complete: BYD. Most Americans have never heard of BYD. It stands for Build Your Dreams. It's a Chinese company that started making batteries in 1995, then cars in 2003. In 2024, BYD sold 3.6 million electric vehicles globally. Tesla sold 1.8 million. BYD sells twice as many EVs as Tesla and growing faster. BYD's cheapest EV, the Seagull, costs $9,700 in China. Tesla's cheapest Model 3 costs $38,000 in America. BYD is selling EVs for 1/4 of Tesla's price, and they're profitable doing it. How? Vertical integration and scale. BYD makes its own batteries, the most expensive EV component. They make their own chips. They own the supply chain from lithium mining to final assembly. Tesla buys batteries from suppliers. BYD is the supplier and the car company. And BYD isn't alone. China has 100+ EV manufacturers: NIO, XPeng, Li Auto, Geely, SAIC. Combined, they're flooding global markets with cheap quality EVs that American companies can't match on price. The U.S. government knows this is a crisis. The Inflation Reduction Act allocated $375 billion for clean energy subsidies, the largest industrial policy in U.S. history. Tax credits, factory subsidies, R&D funding, the goal: compete with China. It's not working. Despite $7,500 tax credits, American EVs cost $50,000 to $100,000. Chinese EVs cost $10,000, $30,000. Even with subsidies, American cars cost 2-3x more. Middle-class buyers in developing countries, India, Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, are buying Chinese. Americans can subsidize domestic buyers but can't compete internationally. And China's building EV factories everywhere. BYD opened a factory in Thailand producing 150,000 vehicles annually, another in Brazil, another in Hungary to serve Europe. They're bypassing tariffs by building locally in 100-plus countries. Meanwhile, American EV companies are struggling. Rivian loses $30,000 per vehicle sold. Lucid loses $200,000 per vehicle. Ford's EV division lost $4.7 billion in 2024. Only Tesla is profitable, and their margins are compressing as competition intensifies. The market sees this. Tesla stock is down significantly from 2021 peaks. Ford and GM's EV ambitions are being scaled back. Legacy automakers are bleeding money trying to compete with Chinese companies that have decade head starts and government backing. China didn't just enter the EV industry. They've won it. 70% market share, lowest costs, vertical integration, and global expansion. Unless something changes dramatically, this becomes 80-90% by 2030, but EVs are just one piece of the takeover. This next domination is perhaps the most critical because batteries are the heart of every electric vehicle, and China controls the entire supply chain from mine to finished product. It's the battery industry. And China owns 69% of global EV battery production, with that number growing. Here's why batteries matter more than cars. An EV battery represents 35 to 40% of the vehicle's total cost. Control batteries, and you control the EV industry's economics. China understood this 20 years ago. America is realizing it now. The top battery manufacturers globally: CATL, China, 37% global market share BYD, China, 16% market share LG Energy, South Korea, 14% Panasonic, Japan, 7% SKI Innovation, South Korea, 6% combined. Chinese battery companies have 53% of production. Add in the fact that CATL supplies Tesla, Ford, BMW, and nearly every major automaker, and China's influence is even larger. CATL alone produces more batteries than all American and European companies combined. They've achieved economies of scale that make competing nearly impossible. Their cost per kilowatt hour is $75. American battery startups are at $120, $150. That 50-100% cost disadvantage is insurmountable at current technology. But it gets worse. The battery supply chain is entirely China-dependent. Lithium mining. China doesn't have the most lithium deposits. Australia and Chile do. But China owns the largest stakes in lithium mines globally through strategic investments. Chinese companies own 50% plus of lithium production globally through mining rights in Australia, Chile, Argentina, and Africa. Lithium processing. This is where China's domination is absolute. Of all lithium converted from raw ore into battery-grade lithium compounds, China processes 65 to 70%. Even lithium mined in Australia gets shipped to China for processing because only China has the refineries at scale. Rare earth elements. Batteries require cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements. China mines 70% of global rare earths and processes 90%. Without Chinese rare earth processing, battery production stops globally. Anode materials. The negative electrode in batteries uses graphite. China produces 90% of battery-grade graphite globally. Cathode materials. The positive electrode requires sophisticated chemical compounds. China manufactures 75% of cathode materials. You see the pattern? Every single input into battery production is China-dominated. Even if America builds battery factories, which Biden's subsidies are funding, those factories will buy Chinese materials. We're not breaking dependence, we're just moving final assembly to America while keeping China in control of supply. The Biden administration allocated $135 billion for domestic battery production. Companies like Ultium, GM's battery venture, Tesla, and startups are building U.S. factories. But here's the problem. These factories will be buying lithium, rare earths, graphite, and cathode materials from Chinese suppliers. China's response? They're building even more capacity. CATL announced a $8 billion factory expansion in 2024. BYD is building battery factories in Thailand, Brazil, and Indonesia. China isn't standing still while America subsidizes domestic production. They're accelerating to maintain the gap, and China holds the technology edge. CATL's Chilean battery has 245 watt clean energy density, 13% higher than Tesla's 4680 cells. Higher density means longer range or smaller batteries for same range. Chinese batteries are now superior in technology, not just price. The U.S. strategy of friendshoring, buying materials from allies like Australia and Canada, is too slow. Building lithium refineries takes 5 to 7 years. Rare earth processing facilities take 7 to 10 years. China has 20-year head start. Unless something radical changes, China's battery chokehold tightens every year, and without batteries, there's no EV industry, no grid storage, no clean energy transition. China knows this. That's why they invested early and now control the entire chain. And the solar industry is even more dominated. Here's the industry where China's domination is most complete, producing more than the rest of the world combined with margins so low competitors can't survive. It's solar panels. And China manufactures 80% of the world's supply, a monopoly in everything but name. America invented solar technology. Bell Labs created the first practical solar cell in 1954. For decades, U.S. companies led solar innovation. But today, 9 of the world's top 10 solar panel manufacturers are Chinese. The only non-Chinese company in the top 10 is First Solar, American, ranked 9th with just 3% global market share. Chinese solar giants include Jinko Solar, Longi Solar, Trina Solar, JA Solar, Canadian Solar, Chinese-owned despite the name. Together, they produce 400-plus gigawatts of solar panels annually. Total U.S. production? About 15 gigawatts. China produces 26x more solar panels than America, and pricing has become a weapon. Chinese solar panels cost $0.15 to $20 per watt. American-made panels cost near $40 per watt. Installing a typical 10 kilowatt residential solar system costs $8,000 with Chinese panels, $16,000 with American panels. Even with federal subsidies, American solar can't compete. How did China get here? The same playbook as EVs and batteries: massive government subsidies, vertical integration, and intentional oversupply to kill competition. From 2010-2020, China provided $47 billion in subsidies to solar manufacturers. Cheap government loans, free land, tax breaks, export support. Chinese companies could sell below cost for years, bankrupting Western competitors. The strategy worked brutally well. American solar manufacturers Solyndra, Suntech, SunEdison, and dozens more went bankrupt between 2011-2019. They couldn't match Chinese pricing and went under. Now American solar installers have no choice but to buy Chinese panels. And China controls the supply chain even more completely than batteries. Polysilicon production, the raw material for solar cells. China produces 80% globally. Even the U.S.'s remaining solar manufacturers buy Chinese polysilicon. Wafer production, silicon sliced into thin sheets. China produces 95% of solar wafers. Solar cell manufacturing, China produces 80% of solar cells globally. Panel assembly, China assembles 80% of finished solar panels. There's virtually no part of the solar supply chain that isn't China-dominated, and this domination extends to components. Inverters convert DC to AC power, racking systems, mounting, and tracking systems are all Chinese manufactured. The U.S. government tried to fight back. The 2012 tariffs on Chinese solar panels were supposed to protect American manufacturers. They failed. Chinese companies simply moved final assembly to Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, while keeping production in China. Panels shipped from Southeast Asia avoided tariffs, but were still 85% Chinese-made. The 2022 Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act targeted Xinjiang polysilicon, where forced labor allegations exist. Result? Chinese companies shifted some production to other provinces, but maintained total output. Western companies faced panel shortages and price spikes, delaying solar projects. China's solar dominance isn't about free markets. It's about strategic, state-backed industrial policy executed over 15 years. They subsidize through losses, undercut competitors to bankruptcy, then dominated supply once competition was eliminated, and now reversal is nearly impossible. Building polysilicon factories costs $1–2 billion and takes 4–5 years. Solar cell production requires specialized equipment, mostly made in China. The capital and time required to build competing supply chains means China's 80% market share likely increases to 85–90% by 2030. But here's what American investors need to understand. Here's exactly what China's clean energy domination means for your portfolio and which American companies survive versus die. Tesla, TSLA, the stock everyone asks about. Tesla's advantage was technology and brand, but Chinese EVs are now technologically competitive at 25% of the price. BYD outsells Tesla globally. Tesla's China sales fell 49% in February 2025 as Chinese consumers bought domestic. Tesla stock down significantly from 2021 peaks reflects this reality. Investment thesis: Tesla survives as premium brand like Apple, but market share shrinks from 20% to 10–12%. Stock faces long-term pressure unless robo-taxi AI story materializes. Ford, F, and GM. Legacy automakers losing $4–5 billion annually on EVs can't match Chinese. Costs: scaling back EV ambitions. Investment thesis: avoid. They're stuck between dying ICE business and unprofitable EV business. Rivian, Rive, and Lucid, LCID, burning cash, losing $30,000 to $200,000 per vehicle, cannot compete with Chinese EVs. Investment thesis: these likely fail or get acquired at distressed prices. First Solar, FSLR, the only American solar manufacturer at scale, survived because they make thin film panels, different technology than Chinese crystalline silicon panels. Benefiting from U.S. subsidies and Buy American provisions. Investment thesis: only solar manufacturer worth owning, but limited upside due to Chinese competition. Battery startups, QuantumScape, Solid Power, etc., promising technology, but years from commercialization. CATL and BYD will likely have similar technology before these startups reach mass production. Investment thesis: high risk, low probability. Winners. Paradoxically, U.S. companies that partner with or sell to China. NVIDIA sells AI chips to Chinese EV makers. Applied Materials sells semiconductor equipment to Chinese battery manufacturers. Albemarle sells lithium. These companies profit from China's growth rather than competing against it. Real strategy for investors: reduce exposure to U.S. EV makers except Tesla, and even Tesla is questionable. Avoid solar manufacturers except First Solar-owned China EV ETFs if you want exposure to the winning side, though U.S.-China tensions are risk. Own commodities. Lithium, copper, nickel needed for EVs are batteries, regardless of who makes them. Own U.S. companies selling picks and shovels to China, equipment, chips, raw materials. The brutal truth: America invented these technologies but lost the industries. China's 15-year head start, vertical integration, government backing, and cost advantages are nearly insurmountable. U.S. subsidies help but don't close the gap. For investors, this means accepting reality. The EV, battery, and solar industries are Chinese-dominated and will remain so for the foreseeable future. Position accordingly. So what happens next? Here's the ultimate question. What happens when America depends on China for the entire clean energy transition? Energy independence becomes energy dependence. For 50 years, America worried about Middle East oil dependence. Now we're creating Chinese clean energy dependence. Every EV needs Chinese batteries. Every solar installation needs Chinese panels. Every grid storage system needs Chinese technology. China understands leverage. They've already demonstrated willingness to use it. In 2010, China restricted rare earth exports to Japan during a territorial dispute. Prices spiked 10x overnight. They could do this again with lithium processing, battery materials, or solar components. The U.S. has three options. Option 1, accept Chinese dominance, focus on other industries, least likely too much political blowback. Option 2, massive industrial policy, $1 trillion to rebuild supply chains over 10-15 years. Possible, but requires bipartisan support that doesn't exist. Option 3, trade war escalation, tariffs, restrictions, decoupling, most likely, but makes clean energy more expensive and delays climate goals. None are good options. China's 15-year head start is nearly impossible to overcome without radical action. For investors, U.S.-China tensions will create volatility. Position in companies that benefit regardless of who wins, commodity producers, equipment makers, rather than betting on one side. The clean energy transition is happening, but it'll be powered by Chinese technology, Chinese manufacturing, and Chinese supply chains. That's the reality investors must accept. So we've exposed China's silent takeover of the $1.9 trillion clean energy industry. The 70% EV market share with BYD selling 3.6 million vehicles annually, double Tesla's volume. The 69% battery chokehold with CATL and Chinese companies controlling every supply chain link from lithium mining, 70%, to processing, 90%, to manufacturing. The 80% solar monopoly where 9 of top 10 manufacturers are Chinese, producing panels at 0.5 watt versus 0.40 for American competitors. The investment implications showing Tesla under pressure, Ford and GM losing billions, and only commodity producers and equipment sellers winning. And the geopolitical reality that America's clean energy future depends on Chinese supply chains. These are the numbers the mainstream media isn't connecting into a comprehensive picture of industry domination. But here's something I didn't tell you at the start of this video. Everything I just shared is completely useless if you don't know which specific commodity stocks benefit from China's EV growth, which rare earth miners are strategic plays, and how to hedge exposure if U.S.-China decoupling accelerates. Without this tactical positioning, you'll miss the profit opportunities while avoiding the landmines. Comment under this video, and I will reveal the 5 commodity stocks that win, regardless of whether America or China dominates clean energy. And I'll see you in the next one.